Hello and welcome to Our Toxic Nation, a call for Reformation Summit. I'm your host, Rachel Roshek, and I'm excited to announce today's guest and topic today with Dr. Evan Hirsch. Welcome.
Rachel, thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you for being here. Our topic today is the four-step process to resolve chronic fatigue naturally. But first, I would like to introduce you to our audience. Dr. Hirsch, also known as the EnergyMD, is a world-renowned fatigue expert, best-selling author, and professional speaker. He is the creator of the EnergyMD Method, the science-backed and clinically proven four-step process to resolving long COVID and chronic fatigue naturally. Through his best-selling book, podcast, and international online program, he has helped thousands of people around the world resolve their fatigue. He's been featured on TV, podcasts, and summits. And when he's not at the office, you can find him singing musicals, dancing hip hop, learning languages, and traveling with his family. Again, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you.
So today's topic is, like I said, about chronic fatigue. So how does someone know they have chronic fatigue?
So it's quite subjective, but the reality is that if you have a tiredness that's not relieved by rest, then there's a problem that needs to be remedied. And so what this looks like is that if you're getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night, and I know that a lot of people who have fatigue issues also have sleep issues, so this doesn't work for everybody. But if you're sleeping 7 to 9 hours a night and you're still tired during the day, surviving on caffeine, oftentimes, maybe you need some naps, maybe you're crashing throughout the day, or if you exert yourself, then all of a sudden you got to take a nap or you're wasted the next day. Those are all signs that there is an energy issue that needs to be remedied.
Got it. So what are the causes of chronic fatigue?
So there's over 30 different causes that I found, but the real root causes that I want to focus on are what I call the toxic five. So this is a combination of the heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, and nervous system dysfunction that builds up in the body over time. And they end up causing a lot of the deficiencies that people commonly work on. So this is, adrenal gland dysfunction, thyroid issues, mitochondrial issues, sex hormone issues, vitamin and mineral deficiencies, like all of those can be attributed in part sometimes due to genetics, but genetics are usually a small part, maybe 10% of the issue. But the toxic five are the larger issue, 80 to 90% of the issue. So generally, I tell people, if you fix your lifestyle habits, like you're drinking more water, getting more sleep, getting as much movement as you can without feeling worse, and then eating the right foods, and you're still not feeling well, then you go ahead and you go to replacing your deficiencies, like all that list that I just mentioned. And if you're still not feeling well, then you really need to be focused on the toxic five.
Got it. And it's interesting, just from my experience, 20 years of kind of traveling through the conventional medical system, is that those five things are the five things that are not being addressed presently within the conventional system. And why do you think it is so hard to treat chronic fatigue? As someone who has it, I can tell you that it is definitely not a one size fits all situation.
Right. Well, I think there's a couple reasons. One is that there's more than one cause. So, what I learned in medical school was something called Occam's razor, which is this idea that one diagnosis is going to explain all the symptoms. So the thought is that, if you've got hair loss and weight gain and fatigue, it could be due to a thyroid issue, Hashimoto's thyroiditis. But that's just not the reality. The reality is that with everybody that I work with who has chronic fatigue syndrome, or long COVID now, all of those people end up having the toxic five plus a number of others, comes out to about 20 of the 30 some odd different causes. So it always is this combination of deficiencies that are present and toxicities. So number one, that's hard for some of providers to wrap their heads around, whether they're conventional or even if they're functional medicine. Though functional medicine doctors and providers are going to do a better job of that. But where functional medicine doctors are challenged is that they can get 95% of the people who walk into their office better by focusing on the deficiencies. So focusing on the lifestyle habits, focusing on replacing the vitamins and minerals and hormones. but they don't really have to get into the toxic five and removing those out of the body. Sometimes they'll dip their toe in for like, heavy metals or chemicals or molds or something like that, but they're not getting at the whole picture. And then if you go to see a specialist who specializes in Lyme, they're not understanding the other components as well, in most parts. So that's the challenge, is that what I found is that you have to address all of the toxic five. And everybody that I work with, and I've found this out over testing over the last decade, everybody with chronic fatigue syndrome, and long COVID, they have all of the toxic five, and all of them have to be addressed. So that's one of the major things that I ask people when I get on calls with them to see if we're a good fit to work together is, have you addressed the toxic five, and how have you addressed all of them? Because I've never met anybody who has addressed all of the toxic five and still has their symptoms. Like, it just doesn't happen.
Yes, that's very true. I know from my personal experience, you're absolutely correct. You cannot chip away at one and leave the others. They all seem to want to work together. Now, can you tell us a bit more about the chronic infections and their symptoms associated with chronic fatigue?
Absolutely. So, long COVID or COVID is the newcomer, which has just been around the last couple of years, unfortunately, and it can cause over 250 different symptoms. So oftentimes it can mimic some of these others, but some of the biggest symptoms are fatigue and brain fog and body pain, and then sleep issues. Some of the other infections that we commonly see are things like Epstein-Barr or HHV6 or CMV. These are all different kinds of viruses. And oftentimes they can just be present with fatigue, plus maybe some enlarged tonsils, enlarged lymph nodes. When we look at some of the Lyme type infections, they're especially unique. And so let's take Bartonella, for example, which can come from domestic animals. About 50% of all domestic animals, cats and dogs, will carry this in their mouths and their nails. So they scratch you or they lick you, and it's very commonly transmitted in that way. But you can also get it from mom through the placenta. You can get it from a tick bite, and that goes for all of these different infections. Like, there's lots of different routes. It's not just from a tick bite. And so then with Bartonella, you can get pain on the bottom of the feet, usually misdiagnosed as plantar fasciitis. You can get body pain, usually misdiagnosed as fibromyalgia. You can get headaches and migraines. You can get sleep issues, oftentimes anxiety, maybe a little bit of depression. And then you can also get a rash, a characteristic Bartonella rash. So those are, you don't have to have all of those symptoms, but if you have a couple of those are pretty pathognomonic or kind of diagnostic for Bartonella. So, if you've got, oh, and then muscle cramps, I forgot about those. If you've got muscle cramps, pain on the bottom of the feet, and a sleep issue, then you definitely want to look at that. And then the last one I'll discuss is Babesia, which is considered the North American malaria. And this one can cause, really bad headaches, really bad sleep, anxiety to the point of panic attacks, depression to the point of suicidal thoughts, shortness of breath. So those are kind of some of the big ones that we see with Babesia. And if you have really bad mood issues like anxiety or depression and a really hard time falling asleep or staying asleep, oftentimes that'll be like, oh, and if you're warm all the time, oh, I forgot to mention Bartonella, you're cold a lot of the time. Babesia, you're warm a lot of the time. Those are really good signs for looking at Babesia. So, in our program, we're addressing all of these, but these are kind of some of the discerning symptoms that we look at to determine whether or not somebody has some of these different infections.
Got it. And the Lyme and co-infections discussion is a completely different topic. But in your opinion, why or what do you think of the laboratory testing for these types of infections?
It's a great question. So testing in general is highly imperfect. When it comes to infections, the testing is generally looking at the immune system's reaction to an infection. It's called a serology test. And you're looking at IgM or IgG. These are different aspects of the immune system. These are immunoglobulins and how they react to the infection. When you have the toxic 5 in your body, the immune system is going to be dysfunctional. So consequently, then you're asking a dysfunctional immune system to give you an accurate read. So 9 times out of 10, you're going to get a test and it's going to say a certain infection is not present. And so, and we treat it anyway in our program because I found that I don't want to leave any stone unturned. I want to make sure we address everything. And I know that these labs are imperfect. So, we're hedging our bets by making sure that we're addressing 95 to 99% of all the known causes present. But that's one of the main challenges that we have with the testing is that you're asking a dysfunctional immune system to give you an accurate read. Now, just to dovetail on that, when we're looking at the toxins, generally we're looking at urine tests to look for heavy metals or chemicals or molds. And the urine tests really are more tests of excretion than they are tests of total body burden. So what this means is that it's telling us how well your body is excreting these toxins. So consequently, when people first start with me, and I used to do this after, a decade of doing a lot of testing every 3 months, when they first started with me, these toxins would not come out. We have to wait 3, 6, sometimes 9 months before all of a sudden there's a waterfall of all these toxins coming out. And so that's how I learned this. And so when somebody, if you do that test and the test shows that you don't have any mold, it doesn't mean that you don't have any mold or mycotoxins in your body. It just means that you're not able to excrete them.
Mm. That's really interesting. I've had practitioners in the past lean a little too heavily on the lab results,
Mhm.
and hearing you say that makes a lot of sense. Um, you kind of touched on this, but what mental health symptoms can these stealth infections cause, and to what severity? Because I know from my experience being misdiagnosed, they just basically throw pharmaceuticals at you trying to, handle the symptoms. But I'm curious to hear what you have to say about the mental health impact.
Yeah, so the infections can cause neurotransmitter deficiencies, which can really contribute to some of the mental health issues. And you can have, it runs the gamut, really. I mean, and with Babesia and with the Bartonella, we're talking about like anxiety and depression, sometimes really severe when it comes to the Babesia. An interesting study that was done recently with COVID was done on 265,000 people. And 6 months after they got COVID, 35% of them had a new mental health diagnosis. And so this was anxiety, this was
Mhm.
depression, this was bipolar, and even a little bit of schizophrenia. So it just goes to show, and we don't know how much of that was actually COVID getting into the brain and affecting the neurotransmitters, because COVID can also act as a biofilm disruptor. It can break up some of the hiding places of the infections, and then all of a sudden the Babesia and the Bartonella and some other infections come out and start causing a number of these symptoms. Because unfortunately, these infections can affect many different symptoms in the body, and it depends really where they are in the body determines what symptoms do you have. So, for example, if they're in the muscles and you have inflammation in the muscles, you're going to have pain in the muscles, and you may be diagnosed with fibromyalgia, right? So, it's important to note kind of like the location and know the characteristic of the infection.
That's extremely interesting. Um, what is the whack-a-mole effect?
So the whack-a-mole effect is what I call what happens when you start going after one infection and another infection pops out. So a classic example of this is that we're starting to go after Bartonella, let's say. And everything that I use is natural. I operate online as a coach. I'm not operating as a doctor anymore, and this allows me to work with people across state lines. And I'm able to do this because I have very potent natural remedies like herbs. So for example, we're going after Bartonella. Somebody has pain on the bottom of their feet, muscle cramps, sleep issues, and we start addressing it. And we're ramping up on drops. I like to use tinctures in order to personalize treatment. And all of a sudden, the person starts sweating a whole bunch. Oftentimes, this is quite common, and oftentimes that indicates that the babesia is popping out. Now, the question is it because we're breaking up the biofilm, the hiding place of the infections in the Bartonella, and then it's popping out? Or is it because some of these superbugs that are being created? Part of what happens in the biofilm is that bugs will swap DNA with each other. And we're starting to get things like Bortezomia, which is what I call this combination of Borrelia which is Lyme, Bartonella, and Babesia. I should probably call it Bortinijovid, because now we have the COVID too. And so
Right,
they're all kind
right.
of like swapping the DNA with each other. So sometimes when you're breaking off a piece of this infection, then it releases another infection. This is also another reason why laboratory testing is inaccurate as you kind of move through this process, because the infections are bound to the toxins and the toxins are bound to each other. And so
Mhm.
consequently, when we start going after a particular infection, start pulling it out of this toxic matrix that I call it, where they're all bound up together, you end up releasing all the other toxic five. And so consequently, some toxins are now floating around in the body that haven't been there before, which is why I find that it's especially helpful to make sure that we're treating all of these things at the same time, but just a little bit of each so that it's not overwhelming to the body and we're detoxing at a rate that the body can tolerate.
Interesting to hear you say that, because the way that our current medical system seems to be set up is you go to one place for infectious disease, another place for, brain issues, neurology. Everything is broken up. So this kind of looking at not only the person as a whole entity, but their conditions as well is something that that's new. I wouldn't say new, but it's different than what we're typically seeing or what I've personally seen in the conventional medical system. It's interesting.
Yeah, I think the challenge is that the conventional medical system is kind of structured based on diagnoses. So, you have a conglomeration of symptoms, and then if you qualify for a diagnosis, then you're able to kind of get into see a specialist who's focused on that diagnosis. And unfortunately, the treatment is typically a pharmaceutical. And
Mhm.
so it's more about covering up the symptoms of that diagnosis and not necessarily getting the root cause of the symptoms. So this is a little bit, flipping it on its head, looking at the symptoms and then looking at the cause, the root causes, and it's a focus on root causes as opposed to diagnoses. I generally tell people I don't really care what diagnoses you have. I care about your root causes because that's really going to get you to the finish line.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I have to say, it's terrifying to hear that these diseases are combining. Um, wow, that brings up a bunch of new challenges, I'm sure, in the future. Are you offering a free gift for our viewers today?
I am, yeah. So we do have a master class. It's 40 minutes. You can actually watch it on 2x speed now if you want to, but kind of goes into my approach, it goes into the four-step process that we haven't talked about today, so you can learn more about that. And then it includes a free call with me if you feel like we're a good fit to work together. You can hop on that and we can see whether or not we're a good fit to work together.
That's that's great. Where can they reach you or find you?
So I'm at EnergyMDMethod.com, and you can get access to everything there, and you can read through the website. We've got frequently asked questions, etc.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking time today to speak with me. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me on, Rachel.
All right. Thank you. Bye.